Trying to build an Adeptus Mechanicus army is expensive. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So if you made the unfortunate decision to make an AdMech army, this video is for you. If you're anything like me, the moment you laid your eyes on these little robo freaks, you fell in love. AdMech are without a doubt one of the best sculpted armies in 40k. With this price tag, it can be a bit of a daunting task to paint them, but I'm here to show you it can be easy and fun to paint these little guys. Now you might be looking at the runtime of this video and want to ask, how can it be easy if the video is over 20 minutes long? Well, it's simple. I said easy, not fast. The simple truth is they are detailed. I'm sure there are faster ways to paint them, but this is just one of the ways that I like doing it. Because let's be honest, if you're willing to spend this much money on a couple of dudes, you probably want to make them look a little good. And speaking of things looking good, if you're interested, our channel features a bunch of tutorials. Or tutorials yet to come, so if you're interested, please like and subscribe for more tutorials and stay up to date with future videos. Enough of that, so let's get into this, shall we? So here's my box of Skitarii. You can either build Rangers or Vanguard, but today I'll be making a Vanguard. I've started the process of cutting out all the pieces, but I'll show you how I clean off the remaining sprue bits off your model. So first, I start off with the sprue cutters because it helps with the remaining sprue bits that are a bit too big for easy sanding, especially on the cape and shoulders. Now I use my file. Personally, I use a nail file since that is what I have on hand. I like the green on the file because it smooths it out well, but any high grit sander works. After that, I glue them all together. We use plastic glue, but honestly, any super glue works. So now it's all done and glued. Here I have all the pieces I'm separating to paint: the body, backpack, gun, and base. Now I will use liquid latex to cover the parts where paint should not be on. That's including the wrist since it will be connected to the gun, the feet since it will be glued onto the base, and then the backpack divot where it will be glued to the back. And don't mind my old chunky latex, it's old but it still does the trick, but I definitely need to buy some new latex. Here I've primed all the pieces black. We specifically used Chaos Black Primer from Citadel, but any black primer works. The first color I will use will be Mephiston Red for the cloak. I'll be painting in thin layers to make sure I can get even coverage without getting the paint too thick on the model. Since the model is primed black, it'll take a few layers, but once finished, it'll look pretty clean. Alright, so here's the cloak done. Don't forget about that arm that's connected to the gun, because I almost did. Next, I'll be using Iron Breaker. This will be used all over the model, but I start with the boots and work my way up. So you can see I've painted all the armor bits and doodads silver. What I recommend is when you're painting these, if you want to be somewhat accurate, is to go onto the Warhammer website and go to the model you're painting, and they sometimes have a 360 view of the model, which has helped me a lot when painting my miniatures. But next up, I'll be using Hashit Copper. I apply copper on many little details on the armor itself, including the little mohawk on top of the helmet, the trim on his armor, the plate on his cloak armor, and knee pads. Now with Black Legion, I like to clean up the black areas where I may have accidentally touched with the paints I've used so far, which the areas should be the pants and the tubes. Now my boy's looking clean. Next up, I use Blood Angel's Red. This will be the contrast I use for just the cloak. You don't need to be too precise, just slather it on. Just make sure it doesn't pool too much. So you can see the Blood Angel gives it a richer red. Now with Nuln Oil, I'll be dumping it all over the silver bits to give it more grime. After it's dry, I'll be using Watered Down Evil Sun Scarlet. This is used to highlight the cloak edges and anywhere that the cloak's ridges flow out where the light will hit. As you can see, if I add too much paint, I'll simply dab it off with my thumb. Next up is Ushabti Bone. This is used for inside of the cloak and the edges. Heads up, you will need to add a few layers of paint to get good coverage. Just make sure this paint is thin enough to where it doesn't goop up. On camera, I realize it still looks to have uneven coverage, but in person it's hard to tell, so don't mind that. Up next is Doombull Brown. All I use for this is simply on the pouches, which are usually around their belt. Now I use Corn Red for the seal. I like to use a different red tone compared to the cloak so it gives it variety and pops out a bit. Using Shop Debone again, we'll be painting the parchment under the seal. Make sure to add a few layers. Now the fun part. I use Abaddon Black and White Scar to paint the cog and skull symbol on their chest. Just know it'll take some patience, but it'll look really nice in the end. Real quick, I'll be adding Reichland contrast onto the seal. Next up, I'll be using Temple Guard Blue and White Scar. First with Temple Guard, I'll be painting the lights that are on the helmet and shoulder. Next, I used a mix of Temple Guard and White Scar to create a highlight on the tops of the lights to get that glowy effect. Now I use Reichland to paint onto the parchment. Why did I separate this step from the seal? No idea. My bad. Now with Abaddon Black, I try my best to paint the writing on the parchment. Next up with Evil Sun Scarlet, I highlight the seal with a few tiny dots, just to give it some flavor. Now with Dawnstone, I make sure to add a light dry brush on all the black tubes. This part is one of my favorites because it just makes all the texture pop out, and I think it's really good. It works really well. Then with Nuln Oil, I douse the pouch on the belt to give it some grime, and then we're done. Finally, we are onto the backpack. With Doombull Brown, I paint on the base of the backpack, the pouch, and the straps. Basically anything that looks like it should be leather. Now with Nuln Oil, I like to do a few layers onto that Doombull Brown. I just like how it darkens the bag and gives it a little bit more grind to it. Next with Ironbreaker, we'll be painting the antenna and basically the rest of the bag as shown. Next with Hatchet Copper, I paint the dangly bit under the backpack. If anyone knows what that is, please comment below because I'm genuinely curious. It looks like some sort of maybe incense burner. I have no idea. But now with Nuln Oil and Rakeland, I cover the silver pieces in the Nuln Oil and then cover the copper pieces in Rakeland. Then with Auric Armor Gold, I lightly dry brush it onto the copper bit to give it some more shine. Like with the blue lights on the body, I use Temple Guard and White Scar to paint all the lights on the backpack. Now I'll be using Black Legion to clean up all the black parts on the backpack, which is mainly the tubes. Next, with Mephiston Red, I like to add a little detail onto the gauge on the backpack to give it some pizzazz. The backpack's done! Now all you gotta do is glue it onto the body and we're ready for the gun. First, we use Doombull Brown to cover the main part of the gun. It can take about 2 layers or so for even coverage. Next, with Hashit Copper, we'll be using it to paint most of the metallic details, excluding some parts which will be silver later on. Now with Ironbreaker, we get to paint the rest of the details in silver. With a mopping of Nuln Oil, I like to add it to the brown and silver of the gun, but leave out the copper for later. Next, with Rakeland, I put that over the copper detail to give it some warmth. Now with Abaddon Black, clean up the Vanguard's hands if need be. With Hashit Copper, don't forget to paint the little detail on the bottom of the pole like I almost did. Whoops. With Nuln Oil, I then paint it over the silver detail on the pole. What do you mean I forgot to video me painting the silver there? I would never. Don't mind me. Then with Black Legion, I clean up any other bits I missed. But with that, the gun is done. And just like that, you paint your first Skitarii Vanguard. That wasn't that painful, was it? I sure hope it wasn't. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We also have an Instagram and a Blue Sky if you enjoy those formats. But I think that's enough learning for today, so as always, I'll catch you in another realm. Bye!